Though nothing will keep us together. We can beat them forever.
Patrick.
Ciao, Robbie. Buongiorno, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here today. And Greg, I'll introduce you a little bit better following this short introduction. Roberto, I don't know if you want to welcome the audience.
Just I'm here only for that. So I've only have to say welcome to everybody. Welcome to this new episode of Extraordinary Architectural Challenges. I'm Roberto. I'm the founder of Medelhan. As you know, Medelhan is the community of architects, interior designers, developers, hospitality investors who create prestigious projects around the world. And today we have a special extraordinary guest, one of the most extraordinary architects I can say on the planet, one of my favorite, of course, but I let Patrick to introduce him. I just only want to say hello, welcome to the attendees that we have registered for almost 20 different countries from the world. So welcome everybody, and I hope you can enjoy this webinar. Thank you, and the floor is yours, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Roberto. And of course, it's always a pleasure to co-host these webinars by Medelhan. And if I'm not wrong, this is the 5th episode, and it's curated by Marisa Corso. So congrats to her as well. And as you were saying, today we have a very special guest from one of the architectural studios that I love as well. And his name is Greg Truen, and he's the principal and founding member of SAOTA, which is an award-winning architectural firm in South Africa. And I guess, if I'm not wrong, Greg, that you are developing projects across 6 continents, so yeah, practically everywhere. And today is dedicated to introduce your project, the Kloof House, which is a villa, so a residential project in Cape Town. And I'm very, very curious to know more about it. So first of all, I would ask you to introduce yourself to the attendees who are following us today, and then we can get deeper into the project with you. Thank you for being with us today, by the way. It's a great pleasure.
Thank you. It's a real privilege and an honor to be here, and thank you for the kind words. Hi everyone, my name is Greg Truen. Let me share my screen quickly, and I'll run you through our presentation. Here we go. All right. Can you see my screen, Patrick?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So my name is Greg Truen. I'm one of 6 principals of actually 7 now of SAOTA. We have a broad practice in terms of where we work. We work all over the world, and we have this kind of history that comes out of working in residential space. And I think we've kind of developed a lot of particular skills and principles around that. We'll often talk about light, space, and life, and the most important idea here is this idea that we're creating environments that people live in. So life's the kind of key idea here, as opposed to say architecture or building as an artifact. It really is, I think, a lot of thinking about how one actually creates buildings that create opportunities for life. And we live in an extraordinary place, South Africa. So we've been lucky to kind of build work on a set of sites and really think quite deeply about how buildings should sit in landscapes, and how one plays around with space, and how one incorporates landscapes and threads space and threads buildings into landscapes, and how one kind of starts to then externalize the way one experiences it uses a building, but creates an opportunity to create these kind of filters that mediate a connection with landscape. So this is kind of a series of our buildings, and perhaps you recognize some. This is a project in Geneva. So these ideas that we've kind of been able to kind of explore in different climates and different conditions, and also across different kinds of buildings. So this is an office building in Lagos in Nigeria. This is a project we're working on in Senegal for a resort. This kind of idea of external living spaces, and this is an apartment, a mixed-use project in Hamburg. Again, kind of exploring many of these ideas that you'll see in Kloof House. Again, a different kind of scale. So this was an intervention in a historic building in South Africa, a group of buildings, and in kind of at the bottom of the image, you can see the top of what is actually a contemporary building. This building, so a little building built out of mud and clay, and using older kind of techniques and methods. But again, these ideas of light and space and these kind of extensions out into the landscape and become quite important, and this modulation of space becomes very important. So the project is in Cape Town. Cape Town is a really extraordinary physical setting and an extraordinary setting. And the project sits kind of in a gap, in a zone between, or in a valley that sits between Table Mountain, which is at the top of the page, and Lion's Head on the right-hand side. And it sees all of these things. So it sits in a landscape, and then it has these views out to horizon and to different parts of the mountain, and kind of one of the obviously the key opportunity is, how do you take a building and how do you make these connections? How do you make a connection to the sky? You know, all of a sudden you're in a site where there's a mountain above you, so you've got to look through the roof. You can see the building down here, kind of in the bottom. There's a building with a red roof, and our building's just to the right of that. And how do you place somebody in a landscape so that their primary experience is of the land and of the environment and the sun moving through the sky and the moon moving through the sky? And how do you kind of dematerialize the building so you make these connections? And that's what I'm going to talk you through. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and if you guys can play the video. This is a video we made. By the way, this is actually my house, so it's a very personal project, and this is a video on how we live in the house and why the house is important to us.
Yeah, let's wait for the video. And there's a lot of questions coming to my mind, and especially, how do you create this continuity with the surroundings? Because when I think of South Africa, I think of the landscape, in a different way from how I do here in Italy. So this will be for sure one of my questions.
Well, I think we'll talk while the video is loading, if somebody is setting it up in the background. So I think if you look at the design, hopefully you'll see these connections out into the landscape.
Okay.
And you'll see, for instance, where we have a view of the horizon, we'll always try and make a visual connection to the horizon. We make these connections as far as we can into the distance.
Greg, I think we get the video. Yeah.
I grew up on a sugar estate in a place called Mhlumi. The one thing I do remember strongly from being a young child was living outside. And as South Africans, we love living outside, It's not like we need our houses to protect us from the environment around us. We actually want them to be filters that allow us to engage in the landscapes. Well, I thought quite a lot about how one could actually draw the landscape and draw the mountain into the space that we inhabit. The mountain's the big experience, and it was the thing that we wanted to unlock. This house it's a fantastic house to wake up in, because you're almost sleeping in the garden. There are a lot of spaces that just feel nice when you're in them. And they kind of support just a cycle through the day. You know, you wake up, you cook, you work, you sleep. It's each of those feels like they're catered for here. The roof is kind of a fundamental part of the experience in the way it's shaped and opened. Being able to watch the moon and the sun move across the sky through the roof has been very powerful. You know, we think traditionally that you look out at a view and you completely disregard the sky. But if you've got a patch of sky that's got no sun into it, you can look at it. And if you've got a mountain or a tree above you, you can kind of look up into that as well. You get a much more powerful connection with nature and its cycles. One of the challenges with domestic architecture or any kind of architecture is how you manage the way people can access the spaces you're in. You really leave the outside world behind you when you come in here.
Wow. I guess you're muted, Greg. Yeah, you're still muted, I guess.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah, great.
Good. Okay.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah, so I was just saying one of the devices we use is this idea of kind of extending space and kind of loosening the kind of spatial boundaries, as it were, either by sharing space internally or by making these very deep extensions of space out into the landscape or up into the sky, which is an idea that I think can be applied to all sorts of buildings, not necessarily just buildings like this where you are on an exceptional site. So one of the other things that's quite interesting about this building is that it is there was an existing building on the site. So it's a brownfield project, and here you can see the existing house, and that existing structure was essentially retained, and we added to the south and to the east of the building, and then put a new roof onto the structure. Because the top of the site is where the views are and where the connection back to the mountains are, the house is somewhat inverted, where you drive down to the bottom of the building, and I'll show you the buildup of the site now. You drive down to the bottom of the building, and there's some garaging and ancillary accommodation down at the bottom level. In the mid-level, you have these essentially the bedrooms and the workspaces, and the roof of that garage becomes a garden space. So we conceptualized the building almost as a set of strata that were cut out of the mountain, and then onto those planted strata blocks we put the accommodation. So you kind of have this greenery that's draped across the building and draped across every level. And we also inserted courtyards kind of to the side and to the back of the building so that we could draw light down into the deeper spaces and surround the spaces that would otherwise have been very internalized with landscape. And then this is the top level. So you can kind of see there's actually a very busy street, almost a highway on the top right-hand corner. And you you drive down and you can kind of come into that living level at the top, or you walk up from the bottom. And again, the building is draped with landscape. So when you come into this building from the top, it feels like you're coming into a ground level condition. And you have this extension of landscape because you look across a planted landscape towards a natural and a city landscape in the medium and far distance. And it feels like the mountain is just kind of rushing down at you and that you're living on a mountain slope. You can see the roof landscape here with these cutouts. So you get this kind of effect where there's kind of a living platform or pavilion that's inserted into the landscape. And the primary idea is that it's almost like a hat, you know, so you've got a hat on top of you, which gives you some protection from the sun. But it almost turns your experience of the landscape into this kind of big cinema-like experience. It heightens the experience. And then in a long section, you can see how you kind of have the garages and some ancillary spaces down at the bottom, come up to bedroom spaces and workspaces. You've got the garden extension over the garage. And then this very interesting kind of modernist pavilion that sits up in the landscape with the mountain and trees around you. What's quite interesting is, which you don't really realize from this, is that you are surrounded by houses. You've got the busy road on the right-hand side, and you've got houses on both sides of the building. And the building's kind of designed so it acts as kind of a blinker and you can't see the other buildings around you. So yeah. I'll show you a series of photographs and we can kind of talk as we go through it.
Yes, and but first of all, you design your own house. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it was pretty painful, trust me. But,
this is the dream of anyone, I guess. But I can't imagine.
It was a great experience and a great opportunity to play with some of these ideas on what is quite a difficult site. So yeah, it was a good experience.
And you know, we were talking about the surroundings before the video was launched, and what you were talking about the horizon, which was one of the key points.
Yeah.
For you to start build a house around the surroundings and within the surroundings. And what has been the work behind it? I mean, how can you validate the fact that the house is actually integrated with the landscape around?
Well, you know, I think if you look at kind of traditional ideas of how a house is organized, in many cultures, a house is traditionally organized around a hearth. You know, there's a fireplace in the middle of the house, and then there are a series of cellular spaces arranged around that. So it's for all intents and purposes an inward-looking device. And it's got a protective wall around it. One of the things that happened in places like South Africa, where the climate is much more moderate, and there's a deep ancient tradition in South Africa of people living in a way where you live outside when you can. And what had started happening to houses is that idea of a hearth in the center was replaced by an idea of a kind of a veranda that ran around the house, which meant that your primary room was actually was outside, and it had a roof on it, and you had this relationship with the landscape, and it was a kind of a long horizontal room that ran around the building. And I think to cut a kind of a long story short, what started happening with modernism is that, and the loosening of these cellular spaces, was that you could then make a connection with the horizon. You could make a connection with an external landscape. In our case, we've been lucky to work with amazing sites where horizon is a big deal. We've learned that if you kind of are quite conscious about the way you engage with it, you have this very, as I said earlier, very almost cinematic relationship with the landscape, and a heightened perception of that landscape. So over time, that's kind of developed into this idea that if we actually draw the landscape through a building, you start to feel like you're standing on the land as opposed to standing inside a building. And if you have this extension out into the horizon, then you're sitting in a vast landscape, and it's a very powerful primal thing, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see. I mean, you can get this cinematic perception by looking at pictures. And what I immediately see in this picture, for instance, is this inverted pyramid.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the most interesting architectural features here. And how did the idea come out? How did you, decide to do it?
It was, you know, so in terms of our process, the first thing we do is we build big landscape models, digital models. So we have a big kind of, for Cape Town, we'd have a big model that would have, say, a 40-kilometer radius on it, and it would have all of the mountains in it. And the first thing when we got onto this, into the model, and you kind of cut a section through it, is you realize that the views are not horizontal, they're above you. And that kind of just generated the profile that became the pyramid. And then I suppose there was this architectural idea, you know, that if we took this wall element in stone, which is a historic material in the construction of Cape Town, and floated this inverted pyramid over it, we had this really interesting kind of architectural diagram, which of course when you come into the building, you have a completely different experience. The pyramid kind of vanishes, and it dematerializes. So it was just an interesting architectural idea that I think it's got some fun in it for sure. But it is strong, and it's also always quite interesting to see how people are so intrigued by this building that they see from the street like this, and then when you come into it's completely the opposite in a way.
Yeah, the first thing that I thought, you know, I don't know why, but my mental connection was to the Louvre Museum in Paris. Yeah, the inverted pyramid. But it's really wonderful, and I mean, it gives you the feeling of what you were saying before. This cinematic structure where you can really appreciate the landscape. It's like it's within the house.
Yeah, I think what it also does, which has been a nice idea, is that you know, one of the things that we've become very conscious of, which comes back to this idea of living in a building, and also how one experiences it, is that the way you experience space is through time, because you know, you move through space and you end up knitting together a sequence of experiences in that space. So the pyramid became an interesting idea because it's almost like an exclamation mark at the beginning of a journey. And then you walk around the wall and you come through this little split where the building kind of cracks open. And you've turned through 180 degrees now, and you're facing a little courtyard, and then which is this courtyard, and then you look above, and there's this really interesting view of the mountain, and then which is that, but then you turn around and you face this view. So there's this kind of sequence of spatial experiences that are pieced together quite consciously as a kind of story or cinematic experience, and that as a device is very powerful, you know. And you do it's always, I always enjoy seeing people walk into the house, because you kind of see them experiencing this thing and enjoying it and going, wow, at the end. It's quite cool.
It definitely is. You know, we work a lot also on Instagram. These are the kind of houses that always fascinate people, because you really get, you understand them even without living there. And these views, even these gardens, no? And you hear a lot about biophilic design, but somehow here you perceive that it's really fully integrated into the house. I mean, the green part. And that's why I wanted to ask you, how much important is to connect for real the house to the green? So how do you bring in gardens and plants? Because sometimes they just put plants and it's like, this is biophilic, but it's not. In this case, I see a full integration.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, it's exactly that. Conceptually, it is this idea that there are slabs we took pieces of the mountain, horizontal slabs of the mountain that are green, and we stack them on top of each other, and then we put the accommodation or the program onto these green slabs, and we've let the green actually come. You can kind of see it here. We've actually let the green come into the building. So the green tends to stop on the glazing line, but in places like in this image, it actually comes into the building. And then we've also often separated the walls and the roof. So they're often these, and they're thin, 10 centimeters, these long, narrow glazing slots that allow light to kind of run down walls. So it's a key idea that by creating this connection to nature, you reconnect the human experience to, or you place the human experience back into nature. You reconstitute a relationship that's been broken by the way we've ended up living, you know, in cities that are in concrete cities. So I think these are important ideas that can apply to buildings at different kinds of scales and different usages. It does require much more engagement, though. So, you know, it does require that these gardens are cared for, and you know, that's another. People talk about biophilic design, but they don't really talk about how that changes your engagement with nature, because you have to become a custodian of nature that has now arrived back in a space, and that's a fundamentally good, healthy thing. You know, it changes the quality of the way you live.
Yeah, I think it is strongly connected to how South African people live. You know, because when I think of Italy, unless you go to Tuscany or those landscapes that we have, a lot of beautiful places where everything comes naturally. You know, you build something around the nature, within the nature. But then it's hard for cities, you know, with a lot of buildings like Milan or New York or whatever, to really implement this idea of greenery within the house.
You know, you say that, and of course, if you look at a lot of these images, you see this amazing big landscape, and you connect it to you know, Tuscany or somebody in Switzerland or whatever. But you know, if you look at this image, this is a completely internalized courtyard where there's a landscape that's been constructed. There's no view. You know, here you're looking 4 meters across this space. So it is possible to have a conversation with nature when that environment's actually fabricated. So this is a landscape that might exist in the Cape, and it's as powerful, you know. So often we find that when we're working in cities which don't have the kind of the natural endowment that, say, Cape Town has, we're very conscious of trying to do this, you know, insert nature into the building and create a story. So I think this is something that one can do anywhere and should be doing. The designers, architects should be doing this.
Definitely, yes. I mean, it completely changes even the mood, I guess, you know, in the morning, and you really breathe what's around you, and through the windows, through these kind of places and internal. It reminds me of, you know, those kind of buildings which are built around ancient ruins, when they try to preserve what's there from history. And in this case, it's about the environment. So you really get the feeling that the house comes out of the landscape somehow. It's really part of it.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, that's a very interesting observation. You're quite right. And that's the result of somebody seeing value in a cultural artifact. Or historic artifact, and then building something around it and celebrating it. And of course, that's what we should be doing with nature. You know, we have this broken relationship with nature, and it's a fragile thing, and we should be celebrating it and making space for it. And those insertions can be quite small, but they can be very, very powerful and very, very meaningful for somebody who sits in that building.
Yeah, I see the point. But just to have a look at the interiors as well. Sorry, Greg, just one point. I wanted to remind the audience that if you want to ask questions, feel free to drop your questions for Greg in the chat. So we will pick some of them and we'll ask Greg your questions. And I was also, you know, looking at the interiors, which are pretty elegant and sophisticated. Even if in some cases they are very, you know, minimal. There's not much, but most of it is made by the environment around, and of course all the structure of the house. And how did you carry out the research on decor? And is there any particular piece that you would like to tell us about?
Well, we've been going as an architecture studio for a long time now. And one of the challenges we had early on in our practice is we realized that if we just did the building, we lost control of the interior. So we started an interior design business called ARC. And then we realized we struggled to find furniture. So we started a furniture company called Oka in Cape Town. And that kind of stemmed from a realization that what we were doing is we were creating spaces for people to live in. And we needed to unpack and understand what that space would be like on the day that they walked into it, and that the whole thing needed to fit together. So I think what you see in this space is a set or you see furniture that's really about creating living opportunities, as opposed. So I wouldn't necessarily describe it as a kind of a decor approach, although it is obviously decor and it has an aesthetic look to it. But it's really about taking a large single space, which is what this whole level is, and that's the internal and the external space, is all essentially one space that's kind of filtered and moderated by these sliding doors, and creating a set of opportunities for people to just kind of inhabit that space. So and to create some articulation of the space. So the furniture becomes the mechanism to define the space and give it kind of a homely or family feel, you know, to give it a more human scale. So a lot of the furniture is almost architectural, you know, it's defining space a little bit. It's creating little living zones, as it were, almost like a series of pod-like spaces. and it's again subservient to the landscape. So there's some colors from the environment that kind of come through the landscape and come through into the furniture, and almost kind of extend the garden again. So it's I don't know if that answers your question. That's a kind of roundabout answer, but
it does.
Saying the furniture is very much part of the design response to the problem at hand.
It definitely
does. Separate out this idea, that architecture is one thing and interior design is another thing, and we're not that interested in that. I'm almost saying that this is a design problem and there's a design solution. That means you need to look at a whole lot of things holistically and pull a solution together.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely answers my question, and I totally agree. I see as a part of continuity with the architectural project. And we got a question by Joseph.
Okay.
And of course, he loves the project, and he was asking, is there anything that you would have done differently with this house design? That actually was very similar to a question that I had, which was, when did you start to imagine this house? I mean, from the initial ideas to its complete realization, has anything changed?
Well, yes, a lot changed. So it's a good question, because I think the answer might sum up a lot of what the challenges of practice. So the initial idea, which came very quickly, was this to create a space that had this very primary connection to landscape, and to create a space that had this very strong connection to the mountain. And that idea and the pyramid roof, those were early ideas, and a lot of those ideas stuck. And the challenge was just kind of developing that over time. I think there are lots of little things I would have done differently. And one of the things that's happened in the past 7 years since we started this thing is just the kind of rapid advance of modeling technology and virtual reality. And I think if I'd had access to some of those tools earlier on, you might be seeing less of the building, because we would have better understood some of the opportunities, and we would have been able to refine some of the connections with inside and outside better. But it's an amazing, it's an amazing building to live in, and it's had a very profound effect on me and our family that live here. So yeah, maybe some refinements, but no real fundamental change. I wouldn't have fundamentally changed anything we've done.
Clear. And there's another question which is about the materials.
Mm-hmm.
And this person is asking, how did you choose the materials for the different surfaces? What was the approach? I mean, there's any kind of rule, or I don't know.
Well, the primary material is the primary reference point is the mountain. And so the floor surfaces, the surface of the mountain informed the materiality of the floor surfaces. So there's a gray granite that's very characteristic of Table Mountain and the Cape. So the floor is a gray granite, which reflects that base stone material of the Cape. The green landscape is another key material. We saw the planting as a material to play with. The front wall to the street is a local shale, and that's a shale that a lot of Cape Town is built from. And then the rest is simple. It's plaster and paint, which again is kind of a white plaster and paint is a material that's used in the Cape a lot. and concrete, where we could express it as a kind of an off shutter finish we have. And then the timber tone of the roof, which is a reference to trees, you know. So the roof, this inverted pyramid, is also a reference to a tree canopy. And the other thing it does, because it's a warm finish, is it at night it's kind of it's almost like a light shade. You know, we bounce light back down off of it, and it takes on this nice warm tone. And that's it.
Yeah.
In terms of color, we've tried to often use quite dark materials so that the landscape is kind of seen against a dark background, the green seen against a dark background.
Yeah. And we got a couple of, let's say, technical questions. The first one is about the wind elements.
Okay.
I'm not sure about the wind over there, but a person, Maurizio, is asking about how did it influence the project, if it did.
It didn't really, I suppose. The house and that roof is built in such a way that it's you know, that roof has got composite steel and concrete beams in it. So there is a rigidity to the building that withstands the wind. And it also means that because you see all of these photographs, of course, on beautiful summer days. But in winter, we get these cold fronts that come up from the Antarctic and are quite spectacular sometimes, with the wind and rain. And the building's designed to kind of stand very sturdily against that. And it's also designed as an observatory, you know, so that you can sit and watch these things happen. So it's designed for wind not to be an issue. We can close it up and it's fine.
Okay. And the other question is about the drainage of the inverted roof pyramid.
Yeah.
And they're asking, how does it work?
There's actually let me go back. So you can see this kind of the pyramid has an external. On the right hand side, there's a slab that floats up, and that actually drops down to kind of an internalized gutter, which then gets picked up discreetly through some columns. The rest of the roof on the left hand side is quite conventional. You know, they're downstairs, rainwater heads, and those run down a series of downpipes that run through the building, and then that stormwater is collected in a series of reservoirs down at the bottom here. So we collect the water from the building and from the driveway. And some of that water is used to go back into the irrigation of the landscape.
Okay, and Greg, I also have a question, which is more about SAOTA as an architectural practice, and since the practice is super known, and of course, if I work with you, I also want to get SAOTA's perspective on things, apart from the brief that the client might share with you. I just wanted to know how much the client's brief is important, and how much actually does your know-how and even philosophy or other factors weight in the final outcomes. I mean, how much the clients follow you in the way you see things, in the way you do things.
So that client input and the client requirements are critical, you know, because you're designing for, again, known people who are going to live in the building, and you want your design to be an enabling thing for your clients. So we absolutely listen to our clients. And we put a lot of effort into understanding, to get with the clients, what their spatial requirements are and what the relationships between those elements are. So we've been doing a lot more work earlier on, looking at adjacencies between programmatic elements. So I think, you know, of course, we can bring experience to the table, and we can say to clients, you know, this might work better, or have you thought of that? And we can explain why. But we're very careful not to impose solutions, and we're very careful to listen. And I think we also have always instinctively understood that architecture is a team endeavor that people work on together. And I think none of us subscribe to this idea of a lone architect kind of sitting out there as a genius, imposing, coming up with brilliant solutions. It's about it. You have to listen, and you have to understand what the parameters are that you're designing against. The better the more you listen, and the better you frame questions to define, to respond to the problem at hand, the better the solution will be. Yeah, we like to listen, and we like engaged clients.
Which is wonderful, because, you know, I think that you can divide, probably, not sure, but, you know, architects into two categories. The one looks at himself or herself, you know, as the artist. So let me do my job. I'm the architect. On the other side, it's wonderful to listen to you and to see that at SAOTA, I mean, a big brand such yours is primarily devoted to listen to the client, because, you know, it makes a huge difference. And I think that at the end of the day, the client must be happy with your technical know-how and all the other stuff, of course.
I think that kind of creativity and artistry is fundamentally important to an outcome, but at the end of the day, an architect is, I think, primarily a problem solver, and if you don't know what the problem is, you're not going to solve it. So it's complex, and it's a balancing act. But at the beginning of the whole equation is this idea of what is the question, and if you can't define the question, you can't solve the problem, and you need a lot of people to do that.
Yes, love the answer. And I don't see any more questions coming from the chat. Actually, I asked all my questions. I don't know, Greg, if there's anything that you find relevant to share with the audience, considering that there are architects and maybe even clients. So is there any aspect of this project that you think is worth to add?
I think we've kind of, you know, perhaps I can just reiterate that this mechanism, or this idea of making these connections back to natural cycles and back to landscapes and back to environments is such a powerful tool for architects. And it's such a key part of our practice, and it brings such value back to the person who works or lives in a building like this. And of course, you know, with all of these changes with working from home and some of the social and cultural changes, you know, a building like this, well, for us, has actually become a work building, because this is where, you know, we all now work in this space. And I think much of what you see in a building like this can be applied to workspaces as well. So yeah, there are a lot of lessons in here. Maybe this is the last image, and this I thought was quite interesting. I took this photograph yesterday afternoon. This is the roof of the garage. You know, this is this is what's happened to this environment over the past few years. It's become really this magical space, and it's given us this connection back to to nature. Yeah, it really is a powerful thing.
It is, and it's just wonderful. Yes, this real connection with the green, and
yeah,
it's a great project. And
yeah,
wow,
it's quite interesting. We've done a couple of we've done a couple of projects in much colder climates now, in places like Canada, Germany, and Switzerland, amongst others. And it's quite interesting to apply all of these same ideas to a project in those kinds of environments, and to see how powerful a kind of resulting connection to a kind of summer-winter cycle is, that you can go from having this kind of experience in summer to in winter, this kind of sitting under a meter of snow, but you're experiencing it, and it's you're not disconnected from it. You might be sitting in a space that's heated, but you're not completely divorced from that winter landscape either. So yeah, it's as I say, it's just this deeper connection to the way nature works and to the way natural cycles work.
And just about this, what was the biggest what is the biggest challenge in that case? I mean, what do you work the most to fit the project to the local landscape? It's about the materials. It's about
materials, but it's also about understanding the climatic conditions. So in a climate that gets very cold, you've got to understand how to properly thermally break the building up. And you've got to understand, you've got to have a strategy to keep the living spaces warm. You've got to technically understand all of these things. So I would think that's actually the biggest challenge, and how to do it in a way that's energy efficient, etc. Those are the challenges,
Super. I love this example also because a few days ago we published on Design Wanted, some mega architecture concepts which are now super trendy within the design community, and a lot of people were commenting that they need these kind of projects, not that crazy cities in the middle of nowhere. And you feel like people are really looking forward for better integrated houses with the landscapes, and I'm glad about it because it's what I love as well.
Yeah, excellent.
Roberto, I don't know if you have any last question you want to join us, but first of all, Greg, thank you very much for your time and for your insights. Again, we know SAOTA, it's one of the practices that we love. The project is amazing. I wish I could see something similar in Italy soon. Somewhere, maybe in Tuscany or somewhere else in Puglia, or we'll see. And Roberto, I don't know if you have any question or.
Yeah, more than questions, I would like to say a big thank you to Greg, because I think that I've been impressed by your project and the idea. There are the ideas behind the project, because we are used to think about the architects as a creative and from the creative point of view and the technical point of view, but there is the idea to answer the question, to solve the problems, that's as you mentioned before. So I've been really impressed, and I see that even that in this, I've been impressed, and I think that you inspired many of our attendees just reading the questions or the comments that I've received. So I have nothing else to add. Only again, thank you, really. I also, of course, want to say thank you to you, Patrick, for the moderation of the webinar. Brilliant as usual. I remind everybody that Patrick is the founder of Design Wanted, and nothing else. I don't know if you guys you want to add something. Otherwise, just we can close the webinar. Just a reminder to the attendees that if they missed a part of this webinar, they can rewatch it or watch complete the full episode on medelhan.com or on our YouTube channel. So Greg, thank you again. I hope to see you soon in person in Milan, maybe during the design week in April. Why not? I am direct invited to our special event that we are going to have. It's called Design Night here in Milan.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you for the opportunity. Enjoyed that.
Okay.
Thank you again.
Thank you, everybody, and see you soon.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye
Have
bye.
a nice day.
Thank you.
Ciao.